Hello and welcome everyone, Lionheart here, and today I'm taking a look at the MSI RX480 Gaming X 4GB graphics card. It's a bit of a momentous occasion as this is the first AMD card that I've ever reviewed on my channel. It's not the first AMD card that I've ever used though, although it has been a long time since I had an AMD card in my system. My previous AMD card experiences were with the rather solid 5770 and the 7770, but that was quite a long time ago and things have moved on a bit, although some might argue that in the GPU front AMD hasn't been doing a lot, and I think that's kind of reflective of AMD's performance at the kind of top end of the GPU market. Their powerhouse GPUs just over the last few years haven't been able to match up to Nvidia's offering, and I've got to admit I'm a bit of an Nvidia fanboy these days. Most of the cards in my systems that I've used over the last few years have all been Nvidia cards, and they're often what I tend to favour when I build a system. However, it's interesting to now take a look at what AMD have been doing, which is instead of, trying to compete, and they have been failing to knock Nvidia's top powerhouse GPUs off the charts, they've instead focused on the kind of middle to lower end of the market, which realistically is the more affordable end and where the majority of customers are looking to pick up their GPUs. Sure, it's nice to have a £600, latest top-end graphics card, but ultimately, for the majority, that's a price you can't really afford, especially when you factor in the cost of the other components going into your PC. Unless you're going really all out and you've got an insane budget, often you're looking at that kind of middle ground. Therefore, enter the MSI RX480 Gaming X 4GB. There is also an 8GB version too if you want more memory. While I don't have any other graphics cards within a similar price range to compare the RX 480 to, it does seem like it's positioned just below Nvidia's GTX 1060 at the slightly lower price point of £209 or $204 on Amazon, compared to the GTX 1060's £225 odd price point. From other reviews and benchmarks that I found online, depending on the game and the API used, the RX 480 and the GTX 1060, the 3GB version, I should say, the 1060 comes in a 3GB or 6GB variant, as the 480 comes in a 4GB and 8GB variant. But those two trade blows here and there quite well, but overall the RX 480 falls just a few FPS short of the 1060 3GB version, but then that's reflected in the pricing. To be honest, there's a 20 odd pound price gap, at least here in the UK, and I guess that's a bit reflective of the performance. But both cards are serious contenders for solid 1080p 60 FPS plus gaming. But before I get to my own benchmarks and temperature tests and things like that, and share kind of my thoughts and conclusion with you guys, let's get stuck in and take a look at what the MSI RX 480 Gaming X 4GB offers. 480 offers 2,304 stream processor units with a core clock speed of 1,303 MHz in its kind of standard gaming mode, or that can go up to 1,316 MHz in its overclock mode. Both of these modes are accessible via the MSI Gaming app. I should also say there's a silent mode as well, which actually lowers the clock speed, I think, to 1,200 and something odd. If you want to do that for whatever reason. Memory speeds are 7,000 MHz in gaming mode and 7,100 MHz in overclock mode. Of course, you can push both the memory and the core clock speeds higher with a manual overclock if you want to, and if you're comfortable with that. And thanks to the Twin Frozer version 6, a custom cooler that MSI have deployed here on the RX 480, you'll have no trouble keeping the card well within its safe temperature zones, but I'll talk about temperatures a little bit later. There's 4GB, obviously, of GDDR5 memory on a 256-bit memory bus. And for outputs, you've got two display ports, version 1.4 ready, 2 HDMI 2.0B ports, and 1 DVI-D port. It can run 4 displays maximum and supports two-way crossfire and AMD FreeSync technology, and we'll come back and talk about that a little bit later as well. The card is powered by a single 8-pin power connector with power consumption rated at 150 watts. There's also RGB lighting for the MSI logo and red LEDs on the twin Frozer cooler with a solid backplate and of course the MSI Dragon logo on there too. Where would we be without that? Obviously, if you are looking to kind of theme your build, this card works wonderfully well in a kind of black-red theme build. I really like the aesthetics of MSI's cards, and I have done over the past few card reviews that I've done, all with a very similar twin Frozer design. So it's definitely something I like. What do you guys think of the twin Frozer design? Are you a fan of the fans, quite literally, of the cooler, or are you not? I should say with the RGB lighting, I'm kind of... I get that they have red LEDs on the twin Frozer cooler itself, which you can't change, but it seems odd that they would then offer you the opportunity to change the colour of the MSI logo and not be able to match that to the colour of the lights on the actual Frozer design. It's something that I hope that in their next kind of iteration of the twin Frozer, I guess the version 7, they maybe look at offering more RGB customization there. I didn't think I'd ever find myself asking for more RGB. But RGB, more RGB. That seems to be the way forward these days. If it doesn't have RGB on it, it's not flashy enough, it seems. Anyway, let's get on to those all-important benchmarks and see how the MSI RX480 4GB fares. I'll be testing the card on my test bench PC, which features an i7-4770K at 3.9 GHz, 8GB of DDR3 RAM, and running it at 1080p, using both DirectX 11 and DirectX 12 where possible. Also worth noting, I'm using the latest 17.3.1 drivers for the RX480, and I've got it set to MSI's pre-configured overclock mode via the MSI gaming app. I'll be testing Battlefield 1, Total War Warhammer, and Rise of the Tomb Raider. So, let's take a look at how it does. So those were the benchmarks, and no surprise to see this card do so well at 1080p, getting well over 60 FPS on each title. I didn't do any 1440p or 4K tests as I didn't really feel there was much need to. Sure, with a bit of tweaking to graphical settings, you can happily run each of these games at 1440p, and depending on how low you drop your settings, you can hit well over 60 FPS too, if that's your goal. However, I really feel that this card is aimed at maxed out graphics on 1080p, and that's solid 60 FPS standard, and the benchmark results reflect that. Kind of a no compromise 1080p 60 FPS gaming experience with the RX480. In terms of temperatures, the strength of the MSI Twin Frozer design shines through again. I'm always really impressed with the cooling of MSI graphics cards. Idle temps of the MSI RX480 were 36 degrees and topped out at 71 degrees in all my benchmark gaming sessions. And even when I was using the card to help do some rendering as well, it didn't go much higher than that. So there's plenty of thermal headroom if you decide to tinker around with overclocking. One thing I was very impressed with, as I mentioned, been using this for some rendering tests as well. This supports Opengl Rendering for Adobe Premiere Pro, which I use to edit and render all my videos in, and it gave me a noticeable improvement and faster render times than Nvidia's CUDA solution for their cards. In fact, despite the difference in processor between my test bench, the i7 4770K, and my main PC, which features a 5930K, a 6-core 12-thread CPU, using the MSI RX480 has actually brought the render times much closer together. So, to conclude, despite it being many years since I've last owned a mid-tier AMD card, I kind of feel that at the very least AMD have remained consistent in this area of the GPU market. They've hammered home that they can do kind of that low mid-tier card really well and actually get you some good value for money at the same time. And they've been able to undercut Nvidia's pricing in most scenarios, giving its nearest competitor, the GTX 1060, a good run for its money in many gaming scenarios. So, the MSI RX480 Gaming X4GB is a solid mid-tier graphics card that will run the latest games maxed out or very near to, at well over 60 FPS in most cases at 1080p. And with DirectX 12 implementation for some games, you can yield some very impressive results as well. In fact, in those benchmark tests, you'll have seen that Total War Warhammer gained 12 FPS more in the DirectX 12 benchmark over DirectX 11. Also, if you want to make use of FreeSync technology, as I mentioned earlier, this card supports, FreeSync monitors are much cheaper than Nvidia's G-Sync alternative right now, so it's certainly worth bearing in mind. Anyway, thanks again to MSI for sending over the RX480 Gaming X4GB. Really enjoyed taking a look at it, and nice to jump over to Team Red and take a look at how they're doing. I'll definitely be taking a look at their future cards as well and see how they compete with Team Green. So until the next one, I hope you've enjoyed. Don't forget to comment, rate and subscribe. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Take pride in the Legion. Check out my affiliates and sponsors, XMG, Greenman Gaming and Overclockers UK. Until the next one, ciao for now.